Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the Sony FE 100-400mm F4.5-5.6 G Master OSS lens. So this lens, of course, kind of fills the gap for those that are looking for a kind of affordable, relatively, telephoto lens. It's still going to deliver good quality, but with some versatility of focal length. And so if you want more information, you want all the nitty-gritty, the details about build, handling, autofocus, image quality, I recommend that you take a look at the definitive review. It's longer, but we break down all the details and how I arrive at my conclusions as a part of that. However, if you're more interested in just an overview and getting my thoughts on the performance of this lens, you're in the right place. And so we're going to jump in and take a closer look at the lens. Now, I used as a benchmark a lens that I'm very familiar with, that I consider probably the best of its type, and that is Canon's EF 100-400L Mark II. And it's a lens that, in terms of feature and design, is actually really similar to this lens. It came a little bit before what this Sony did, probably predated it by a couple of years. And you can tell that I would say it was an influence, because some of the things, like down to having a tension ring here, was something that I had first seen executed on the Canon. I see it here. Very similar feature set and basic design between the two lenses. They similarly focus down to a relatively very close, right under a meter or right under 3 feet. And so the Sony, however, gives you a little bit better magnification because of the fact that it doesn't focus breathe in the way that the Canon does. And so in some ways it's a little bit more useful up close for things like that. Like the Canon, it executed a hood, or excuse me, a little door here in the lens hood that would allow you to access a polarizing filter if you were to use one there. And so some similar design elements when it comes to that. The GM lens here is, it's one advantage it does have over the Canon is while it's a little bit longer, it's I think 205 millimeters, and so it's just a few millimeters longer than what the Canon is. It does have the advantage of being a bit lighter. The Canon, both of them have metal exteriors. The Canon is probably a little bit tougher maybe, but it's at the same time, you save about 250 grams in weight, which I think is probably appropriate to, the platform here for the Sony, in that you're using it with smaller and lighter camera bodies. And so a little bit of weight savings is appreciated here. And this lens still comes across as being really tough and sturdy. It's also thoroughly weather sealed, starting with a gasket here at the rear lens mount. Although, like always, I find Sony, if you're coming from DSLR, Sony gaskets seem really tiny by comparison. They're more flush rather than coming out. And so anyway, it's probably fine. But there's also, I count 17 other seal points at all of the rings and at the buttons and switches that are on here. And then up front you have a fluorine coating that helps to resist fingerprints and moisture, makes it easier to clean. And so you've got all of the ingredients for a professional grade of build here, that for a lens that's going to be durable and tough and, hold its own out in the elements where you're very likely to shoot either sports or wildlife. And so anyway, certainly gets high marks when it comes to that. Similarly, it does have a detachable tripod foot, but not the collar itself. That's similar to the Canon. What Sony has that Canon does not is the focus hold button, which you've got at 3 different positions. So no matter what rotation you're shooting at, you have a handy focus hold button. I don't rely on the focus hold button quite as much as I used to now that Sony has full-time IAF. It used to be I mapped it to that. And so now you don't have to worry about that as much, but there's a host of other functions that you can map to that button that can certainly be useful for you. And so it's certainly great to have that as a feature. The lens does have Sony's OSS, or optical steady shot, and so it does work in conjunction with your camera's in-body stabilization. And so byproduct is you get really good steady hand-holding results, and so that part certainly works well also. A really strong point here is the autofocus. And I think that really, while the Canon in some ways is still the superior lens, I wouldn't say that it's a superior package. What I mean by that is when you mount a lens like this on one of Sony's better focusing camera bodies, like I use it on the A9, for example, for these sequences,
it becomes so good that it's almost like cheating. I mean, the autofocus is so fast. This employs a dual, it's SSDD something or other. I think it's SSDDM is the, all the initials for the focus motor, but essentially it's high torque linear motors that are used in conjunction on either side of the elements that move, that allow it to really kind of push and pull and allow you to have really fast, really quiet, really accurate autofocus. And you can tell, I mean, it's just fantastic. That combined with the amazing tracking abilities of a body like the A9, PET IEF, allowed me to just nail these sequences, and it's really effortless. I mean, it's really as simple as, getting the camera ready to go in high speed mode, get into AFC, and then just aim the camera at the, at whatever your subject is, and hold down the, the shutter button, and the camera really does the work in a really stellar job. And so, after years and years of using the Canon, I've owned it for probably 5 or 6 years at this point. I was able to get better results very quickly, even being unfamiliar with the lens, with that combination than what I've ever been able to get out of my Canon lens, with the various bodies that I've used it on. And so I think that that's really where the appeal is. And so the superior autofocus performance here, coupled with superior autofocus of the cameras, if you marry it up to the right camera, really gives you a unique and special focus experience. And that leads us to a discussion of the image quality. There is very little to distinguish this lens from the Canon. I think the Sony's a little bit better at 100mm. The Canon's a little bit better at 400mm, which is arguably more important. That's going to probably impact more your performance using it with extenders, for example. But the difference is not significant. So I don't know that you would notice it much unless you had the two lenses side by side. I do think that the Canon maybe has a little bit smoother bokeh quality. The Sony can, in some situations, be a little bit jittery. But outside of that, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of image quality difference, which is saying a lot, because the Canon has been, as I said, the benchmark. It's been the best of its bunch. And so in terms of sharpness, you're getting very good results. It's also worth noting that if you're kind of debating between this lens and the newer 200 to 600mm G lens, again, optically, you're not seeing much of a difference there. In fact, at some points, the 200 to 600, although it's the cheaper lens, is actually optically superior, at certain points in the frame. But again, it's splitting hairs, because, both of these lenses are giving similar levels of performance. If you're making a decision about this lens, I would look at it more from a packaging perspective. For one thing, this lens, because it's much more compact, it's definitely lighter than the 200. You can carry this and store this in ways that you can't the larger lens. And so I would say your chief advantage there is when it comes to the weight and the size. It gives you more versatility on how you're going to pack it. And even if you're carrying along a 1.4 times extender, it's definitely still going to take up a lot less room for traveling. So, if you're in a situation where either you're backpacking or you're traveling abroad and you're counting the ounces or the grams and trying to make things work, this is probably the better choice. If you regularly shoot up past 400mm, however, I recommend going with the 200 to 600mm. I think that, again, I couldn't tell a difference in either build, autofocus, or overall performance between the two lenses. They behave very similarly in my experience. And so I think that it really comes down to, if you're going to regularly shoot at that longer focal length, remember that even though the maximum aperture of the 200 to 600 is a little bit smaller, 1/3 stop, f6.3, at 400 to 600mm range. If you're throwing a 1.4 times extender on this lens, you're at a maximum aperture of f8. So you're actually at a 2/3 stop disadvantage. Not to mention the fact that even with a 1.4 times, you're only going to get out to 560mm, so not quite the same degree of reach. And so if you really need the longer reach, go with the lens that covers that natively. The other thing to consider is price. This lens runs you around $2,500 US, so it's about $500 more than what the 200 to 600 G lens is. Then on top of that, if you're wanting the 1.4 times extender, if you don't already own that, that's another $500, and so you're looking at a 50% markup by comparison. That's significant. Two, I think it's a little bit overpriced when you consider the Canon. The Canon lens is excellent, you know, and as I said, very similar in performance, maybe even a hair better in terms of build. And so it runs about $2,200 US, and so that's $300 additional for the Sony lens. I think at the end of the day that the Sony probably should be priced closer to where the Canon is. I think that's the fair price point. And so outside of being a little bit overpriced, this is an excellent lens. It performs very well. It gives you fantastic results. And so if you're looking, you know, and you're shooting a Sony, Sony FE, and you want a compact and versatile package to give you good telephoto reach, the GM is a great way to go. If you want even more reach, consider the 200-600G lens, because I love that lens and the way that it performs as well. If you want more information, you can check out either the definitive review as mentioned, or you can look at my text review and go through it at your leisure there. There's also a linkage down below to the image gallery if you want to look at more photos from the lens. Beyond that, there's also linkage there to purchase the lens or to follow me on social media, become a patron, sign up for my newsletter. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.